How does a quarterback do everything right and still watch his entire future disappear right in front of him? Not slowly, not over years, but in a matter of weeks, on the sideline, under the lights, while the whole country watches it happen in real time. Because that's exactly what happened in Cleveland. What started as a routine draft decision quietly turned into one of the most brutal and overlooked position takeovers in recent NFL history. No headlines at first, no dramatic announcement, just a series of moments that didn't seem connected until suddenly they were. You had one quarterback with record-breaking college production, years of experience, and the trust of the coaching staff, and then you had another, surrounded by hype, questions, and a draft day slide that made no sense to anyone watching. For a brief moment, it looked like the safer choice had won, like the story had already been written. But the NFL doesn't follow scripts, and in this case, the entire narrative flipped when no one expected it. Because somewhere between a shocking draft decision, a mid-season collapse, and one perfectly timed opportunity, everything changed, and by the time people realized what was happening, it was already too late. This isn't just about a depth chart shift. This is about how fast a career can unravel, how quickly a franchise can change direction, and how one decision can quietly end a story before it ever really begins. April 2025 was supposed to be simple. One of the most talked about quarterback prospects in years was sitting there on the board, waiting for his name to be called. Shedeur Sanders had the hype, the confidence, and the spotlight that followed him everywhere. And yet, pick after pick, team after team, he kept getting passed over. First round, gone. Second round, gone. By the time the third round was winding down, the tension had turned into disbelief. And then, the Cleveland Browns stepped in. With the 94th overall pick, they made their decision, not Sanders. Instead, they took Dillon Gabriel, a name that for many fans watching felt completely out of left field. The reaction was immediate. Analysts questioned it, fans were confused, even people inside the football world couldn't quite piece together what Cleveland was seeing that everyone else wasn't. Because this wasn't just a small reach, this was a statement. Gabriel was solid, experienced, and incredibly productive in college, but most projections had him going much later. Meanwhile, Sanders, the player many believed had first-round talent, was still sitting there, waiting, watching, and now watching the Browns pass on him directly. For a moment, it looked like Cleveland had made their choice, like they had planted their flag and decided, this is our guy. But then, everything flipped. Just 50 picks later, in a move that caught everyone completely off guard, the Browns traded up. Not for a lineman, not for depth, for the same quarterback they had just passed on. With the 144th pick, they selected Shedeur Sanders anyway. Now the confusion turned into chaos. Why take Gabriel first if you still wanted Sanders badly enough to move up and get him? Why pass on the higher upside player only to circle back like you couldn't risk losing him? It didn't add up on the surface, but underneath it revealed something much more telling. Cleveland wasn't choosing a quarterback, they were hedging everything. Two different styles, two different ceilings, two completely different paths forward, both placed into the same room, competing for the same future. It looked smart, it sounded logical, but in reality, it set the stage for something far more complicated than anyone realized at the time. Because from that moment on, this wasn't just a draft story anymore, it was a collision course. Before this turns into a story about what went wrong, you have to understand who Dillon Gabriel actually was, because the version most people remember now doesn't come close to telling the full picture. This wasn't some random late-round flyer. Gabriel walked into the NFL as one of the most productive college football teams had ever seen. Over 6 seasons, he didn't just put up numbers, he rewrote record books. We're talking about nearly 19,000 passing yards, over 150 passing touchdowns, and a combined total that put him at the very top of FBS history in total touchdowns. Week after week, year after year, no matter the system or the team, he produced. And it wasn't empty production either. Coaches trusted him, teammates rallied around him. He was known for his preparation, his decision-making, and his ability to run an offense without chaos. While other prospects relied on raw talent, Gabriel built his game on consistency, precision, control. That's what made Cleveland's decisions start to make more sense. To the Cleveland Browns, Gabriel wasn't the flashy pick, but he was the safe one, the quarterback who could step in, manage games, and stabilize a locker room that had been anything but stable for years. In a building desperate for reliability, that mattered. But there was always another side to the evaluation. Scouts questioned the ceiling, the height, the arm strength, the ability to create when plays broke down. While his resume was stacked, the concern was simple. Could he translate that success when everything sped up at the NFL level? Meanwhile, sitting right next to him in that same quarterback room was the exact opposite profile. Bigger arm, bigger presence, higher upside, riskier, but potentially game-changing. And that contrast is what made the situation so dangerous.
Because Gabriel didn't just have to prove he belonged in the NFL. He had to prove he was better than the alternative the entire world was already watching. And that's a much harder battle to win. By the time the 2025 season actually kicked off, the plan in Cleveland already felt shaky. The Cleveland Browns weren't easing into anything. They were juggling chaos. Deshaun Watson was still recovering and barely a factor. Joe Flacco was brought in as a short-term safety net. Kenny Pickett was trying to revive his career. And then there were the two rookies, one seen as the steady option, the other is the wild card waiting for a chance. At first, Cleveland tried to stick to the script. Let the veterans handle it. Let the rookies develop quietly. But that plan didn't even make it past the first month, because everything started falling apart. Turnovers piled up, the offense stalled, losses stacked one after another, and by week 5, the Browns were out of patience. They made the move that felt inevitable, but still carried weight. They handed the job to Dillon Gabriel. This was his moment, the opportunity he had built toward for years, the safe pick, the prepared one, the quarterback who was supposed to stabilize everything. And for a brief second, it felt like the story might actually go his way. But then, reality hit. The numbers weren't just bad, they were impossible to ignore. Drives died early, passes missed targets, the offense couldn't find rhythm. Game after game, the production just wasn't there. His quarterback rating sank to a level that raised eyebrows across the league. Advanced metrics placed him near the very bottom of starting quarterbacks. Even routine plays started to look difficult. And the worst part? There was nowhere to hide. Every throw was under a microscope, every mistake amplified by the fact that another quarterback, one the fans were already curious about, was standing just a few feet away on the sideline. The pressure wasn't just coming from opponents, it was coming from inside the building and outside of it. Week after week, the conversation grew louder. How long could Cleveland stick with this? When would they make the switch? And more importantly, had they already made the wrong choice on draft night? Because at this point, it wasn't just about development anymore. It was about survival. And that pressure was building towards something unavoidable. And then, just when it felt like the pressure couldn't get any heavier, everything changed in a single moment. It didn't come from a benching, it didn't come from a dramatic sideline argument or a headline-making decision. It came from something far more sudden and far more brutal. In a Week 11 matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, Dillon Gabriel took a hit that ended his night early, a head injury. No warning, no time to respond. Just like that, the one thing he couldn't control pulled him off the field, and in that exact moment, the door opened. For the first time all season, Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field with real stakes, not preseason reps, not garbage time. This was live, meaningful football, and the entire situation shifted instantly. Because he didn't hesitate, he moved the offense, he made plays, he brought a different kind of energy, something that had been missing for weeks, and more importantly, he won. Then he did it again. And just like that, what was supposed to be temporary started to feel permanent. By the time Gabriel was cleared to return, something in Cleveland had already changed. Not publicly, not officially, but inside the building, the momentum had flipped. The offense looked different, the confidence looked different, and the coaching staff, they weren't about to interrupt it. So they didn't.
No announcement, no controversy, just a quiet decision that spoke louder than anything they could have said. The job was no longer his. And the most brutal part? Gabriel never actually got the chance to take it back. What started as an injury turned into a takeover. By the time Dillon Gabriel was cleared to return, the situation had already shifted in a way no press conference could explain. Officially, nothing had changed. Unofficially, everything had. He wasn't the starter anymore. And then came the moment that made it undeniable. Late in the season, during a game against the Buffalo Bills, Shedeur Sanders went down briefly with a finger issue. For a split second, the door reopened, the same door that had been slammed shut weeks earlier. Gabriel stepped back onto the field. One snap, that's all he got. The ball was snapped, the pocket collapsed almost instantly, and before anything could develop, he was on the ground. Sacked. Play over. And as he got up, the reaction from the crowd said more than any stat line ever could. They booed. Not out of hatred, not even out of frustration with him specifically. It was something worse. It was the sound of a fan base that had already moved on. Think about that for a second. A quarterback who had started games, who had been trusted to lead the offense just weeks earlier, reduced to a single snap, ending in a sack, followed by boos echoing through the stadium. And then, somehow, it got even more surreal. After the game, Sanders, his replacement, apologized to him. Apologized for the situation, for putting him back into that moment after coming off injury. It was a gesture of respect, no question, but it also felt like something else, like an acknowledgement, like everyone involved already understood what this had become. Because that one snap didn't just end a drive, it ended any illusion that there was still a competition.
By that point, the decision had already been made, even if nobody had said it out loud. And just when it felt like things couldn't tilt any further, the entire structure of the building changed. The Cleveland Browns didn't just move on from a quarterback, they moved on from the man who believed in him. Head coach Kevin Stefanski was out. The same coach who drafted Dillon Gabriel, gave him first-team reps, and stood by him during the rough stretch. Gone. And with that, whatever support Gabriel had inside the organization disappeared overnight. In came Todd Monken, and this is where things took a turn that almost felt scripted, because long before he ever stepped into Cleveland, reports suggested Monken had already been interested in Shedeur Sanders during the draft process. This wasn't a neutral observer walking into a quarterback competition. This was a coach who already had his guy. From the moment Monken arrived, the tone shifted, subtly at first, but if you were paying attention, it was obvious. In early interviews, when he talked about the quarterback room, there was a clear difference in energy. When Sanders' name came up, the language changed. More excitement, more belief, more detail, words like playmaking, instinct, natural ability. And then there was Gabriel. Mentioned, but almost in passing, grouped into the conversation rather than highlighted, described more like a depth piece than someone competing for control of the offense. It wasn't harsh, it wasn't disrespectful, but it didn't carry weight. And in the NFL, that difference matters more than anything. Because quarterback competitions aren't just about performance, they're about trust, about who the coach believes in when everything is on the line. And by the time those early offseason interviews were over, the message coming out of Cleveland was impossible to ignore. If the season started tomorrow, the real competition wouldn't include Gabriel. It would be between Sanders and Deshaun Watson, which tells you everything you need to know. The depth chart hadn't been officially rewritten yet, but the power structure had. And once that shifts in an NFL building, it almost never swings back the other way. For Gabriel, this wasn't just a setback anymore. It was the beginning of the end. And that's when the noise started to build. Not loud at first, not headline-grabbing, just quiet reports, whispers coming out of Cleveland that something was about to happen. Because once it became clear that Dillon Gabriel was no longer part of the real competition, the question wasn't if he would move, it was when. Insiders began hinting at it. Reports suggested the Cleveland Browns couldn't go through another offseason juggling 4 quarterbacks. It didn't make sense for the roster, it didn't make sense for development, and it definitely didn't make sense for a player who had already been pushed to the background. So the idea started gaining traction.
Gabriel as a trade piece, not a headline star, not a franchise centerpiece, but something valuable. A young quarterback on a rookie deal with experience, with production, and with just enough upside for another team to take a chance. And one destination kept coming up, the Atlanta Falcons. On the surface, it almost felt too perfect. A fresh start, a new system, and most importantly, a connection. Rumors suggested a reunion scenario, linking Gabriel back with familiar coaching ties, a place where he wouldn't have to fight the same uphill battle he faced in Cleveland, a place where he might actually get a clean opportunity. But here's the thing, nothing was confirmed. No deal, no official talks, just speculation building with each passing week. Reports, predictions, insiders connecting the dots. The kind of situation where everyone can see the direction, even if no one has announced it yet. And that's what made it feel inevitable. Because while Shedeur Sanders was building momentum, building relationships, and quietly taking control of the locker room, Gabriel was doing the opposite. Not by choice, by silence. No public frustration, no complaints, no headlines. Just a player watching his role shrink, his opportunities disappear, and his future with the team slowly fade out of focus. And in the NFL, that kind of silence usually means one thing. The exit has already begun. You're just waiting for the move to make it official. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable, because if you step back and look at everything that happened, it forces a question most people don't want to ask. What more was Dillon Gabriel actually supposed to do? He came into the league with experience most quarterbacks don't have. He produced at a historical level in college. He earned the trust of his coaches early. He handled adversity without creating distractions. Even when things started falling apart, he didn't point fingers, didn't complain, didn't turn it into a story about himself. He did everything the right way, and it still didn't matter. Because at the same time, the Cleveland Browns were making a different kind of decision behind the scenes, not just about performance, but about potential, about ceiling, about what this offense could become, not just what it was in the moment. And that's where Shedeur Sanders changed everything. From the beginning, there was always a sense, fair or not, that Sanders offered something Gabriel didn't. A bigger arm, more playmaking, a higher long-term upside. It wasn't proven yet, it wasn't guaranteed, but it was enough to keep the door open. And once that door opened, it never really closed again. The draft itself told that story. Cleveland took the safer option first, but still couldn't resist going back for the riskier, more dynamic one. They tried to balance both paths, stability and upside, floor and ceiling. But in the NFL, you don't get to live in both worlds for long. Eventually, you have to choose. And when that moment came, after the injury, after the wins, after the shift in momentum, the choice became obvious. Not because Gabriel failed alone, but because Sanders gave them something to believe in moving forward. That's the part that makes this story hit harder. This wasn't just about bad games or one tough stretch. This was about timing, about opportunity, about being in the wrong position at the exact wrong moment while someone else stepped into the spotlight and never gave it back. Because the truth is, the NFL isn't built on fairness, it's built on windows. And once yours closes, it doesn't matter how hard you worked to open it in the first place. And maybe that's why this story feels bigger than just football, because what happened in Cleveland isn't rare, it's just rarely this visible. The rise, the fall, the switch, it happens across the league every single year. But this time, you could actually see every piece of it unfold in real time. The moment a team started leaning one way, the moment momentum shifted, the moment one career stalled while another one took off. For Shedeur Sanders, this is just the beginning. The opportunity is there, the belief from the coaching staff is real, and the spotlight isn't going anywhere. But with that comes pressure, because in Cleveland, nothing is ever guaranteed, not with Deshaun Watson still in the picture, not with new quarterbacks potentially coming in, and definitely not with a fan base that has seen this story play out too many times before. Every snap from here on out matters. And then there's Dillon Gabriel, because while it may feel like the end of his chapter in Cleveland, it's not the end of his story, not even close. Quarterbacks have rebuilt careers from situations just like this, sometimes better, sometimes stronger, sometimes with a completely different narrative waiting on the other side.
But what makes this one stick with you is how it happened. No explosion, no scandal, no moment where everything clearly broke. Just a slow shift, a quiet decision, and a realization that came too late to change anything. And that's the part that lingers. Because sometimes it's not about being the better player. Sometimes it's not even about what you did wrong. Sometimes the story was already moving on without you. And by the time you realize it, everyone else already has.